Today on the Taste of Lizzy T show, I'm going to be showing you how to make stuffed pork chops. You're going to make a homemade savory stuffing and bake it inside some thick bone-in pork chops. It is going to be a delicious comfort meal, great for a holiday, but also easy enough to make just any night of the week. Let's get started. The first thing you're going to do is get a skillet going. And to it, I'm going to add 1.5 sticks of butter. That's about 3/4 of a cup of butter. And then I'm going to put in 1/2 cup of celery and 1/2 cup of onion. And we're just going to saute this together. This is going to be the start of your stuffing mix. We have some homemade breadcrumbs here that we have dried out. You can use store-bought breadcrumbs for your stuffing if you'd like, but I like to just cut up white bread and let them dry out for a day or two, or even pop them into the oven to let them toast. And you have easy, cheap stuffing cubes. So we're just gonna saute this onion, celery, and butter together until the onion is a little bit translucent and starts to become tender. So the celery and onion will not cook that much more when it's in the oven in the pork chops, so you'll want to be sure it's as tender as you like it in the skillet. So I'm just going to let this cook for a little bit, and while it's cooking, we're going to get our pork chops ready. So as you can see, I'm making 2 stuffed pork chops. This stuffing makes enough to stuff about 4 to 5, depending on how big your pork chops are. But I like to use 2 and put them in a casserole dish and then put any extra stuffing just around the pork chops. So I have 2 bone-in pork chops. I'm going to take a sharp knife and slice halfway through the meaty part of the bone-in pork chop to create a pocket. And as you can see, you can open it up and just use your knife to loosen any pieces. I go pretty much to the bone, and you want to make sure you have about equal thicknesses on both sides of the pork chop. So that's that one. Let's do our other pork chop. Slice that right in until you have a nice pocket. Now I have in the past used boneless pork chops. It does work, but for this recipe we prefer to use bone-in pork chops, nice thick ones. Go to your butcher shop and tell them you want to make stuffed pork chops, and they'll cut you some nice big thick pork chops. I'm going to season the pork chops with just some salt and pepper on each side. Flip them over and do the other side. Our butter and onions and celery are smelling amazing. Just rub that in a little bit. And our pork chops are ready. Be sure to wash and dry your hands well after you handle the pork. And we're gonna give our butter and celery and onion a stir. It smells so good. As soon as the celery and onion are as tender as you'd like, you can get the rest of the ingredients ready for the stuffing. So I'm going to take my 7 cups of bread cubes and add 1 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, 3/4 tablespoon of poultry seasoning, and then 3/4 cup of chicken stock. And then I will just go ahead and add in this butter mixture. Give it a good stir. And I'm going to keep the skillet on, and we're going to brown the pork chops in the skillet. So we want to keep that hot so that we get a nice sear on the pork chops. So just mix until you can tell all the spices and seasonings have gotten all over that bread. And that is how you make the stuffing. Really, really easy. This is the same stuffing that we use at Thanksgiving, except for then we use some eggs in it just as a binder. But since this is going to be stuffed inside pork chops and we don't want to overcook the pork, we left the eggs out. Okay, so let's sear the pork chops. I'm gonna add just a little bit of oil. There's a little bit of butter left in there, but we'll add a little bit of oil so that the pork chops don't stick. I'm gonna take one pork chop, put it right in, you hear that nice sizzle. And then a second pork chop. Just a couple of minutes on each side is all you need to get that nice sear. Then I'm gonna flip the pork chops just once. You see that little bit of brown on the edges. Sometimes I've seen people stuff the pork chops before they brown them in the oil. You can completely do that if you'd like, but I find this is a little bit easier to do and handle in the skillet. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off because I think they're about done. I'm gonna get a clean cutting board, take off both of the pork chops. And it's time to get our hands dirty. So I'm gonna take some stuffing, kind of mash it in my hands, open up a pocket in the pork chop, and just stuff that stuffing right in. You can squeeze in as much as you possibly can. I like to have it coming out just a little bit. It makes them look really pretty. It probably can hold half of a cup of stuffing, probably a little bit more depending on how big pork chops are. And then I'm gonna go ahead and place it right in the baking pan, and we'll get our second pork chop stuffed. I have the oven preheated to 350 degrees. It's important with pork to not overcook it. If you want moist, tender pork chops, do not overcook your pork chops. It's okay if there is a little blush of pink inside pork chops. You want to use a meat thermometer and allow the pork chops to cook until they're at least 145 degrees. It's safe to eat them when they are 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and then just let them rest a couple of minutes, and then you will be ensured to have a juicy pork chop. I'm gonna take the rest of the stuffing and just sprinkle it around the pork chops. Again, if you are serving more than a couple of people, you can use the stuffing to stuff additional pork chops if you'd like. These are pretty big pork chops though, so one can definitely serve more than one person. I'm going to wash my hands and then they'll be ready for the oven. Okay, so remember, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, cook them until they are 145 degrees internal temperature of the pork, and they will be done. The exact timing is gonna be a little tricky because it will depend on how long you had them in the skillet and how thick the pork chops are. Ours generally take about 20 to 25 minutes, so you can start at 20 minutes and see how they are from there. But remember, don't overcook pork if you want a juicy pork chop. So I had some other pork chops baking so that I could show you the finished product. Here they are. I love to use a sprinkling of fresh parsley on top, which gives it just a pretty look. Let's go ahead and plate one of these so we can see what it looks like. So as you can see, this is one pork chop. It's quite a big serving, but it looks beautiful and I think your family's gonna love it. Let's dig in. So I'm gonna get a little bite of pork here and some stuffing to go with it. This smells so amazing. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check back again on the Taste of Lizzy Tea page for our newest video.